I finally escaped from my folks. I took the night train to the big city. My dream was waiting for me here. A luxurious life. Like the cool TikTokers. In the morning, I met with the realtor and I gave him all the saved money. Half an hour later, I was at the door of the rented apartment. I rented the shack for the first time. Soon I would definitely get rich, and I would move to downtown in anticipation. I put the key in the lock, but it didn't fit. Weird. Then the door swung open. A man was staring at me from the apartment. I don't understand anything. I immediately called a realtor, but he didn't answer. And then I realized I got cheated. I wanted to cry out of desperation. I was left on the street in a strange city. No money, no roof over my head. I had to find a job. There was no question of returning to my parents. To return meant to admit defeat. They kept saying all the time I was not ready. Wandering the streets, I almost gave up. But I suddenly saw an ad looking for a housekeeper for an 80-year-old grandmother. Housing is provided. This was a chance, or I would just stay on the street. I went to the specified address. The door was opened by an arrogant guy named Steve, who claimed to be Miss Matson's nephew and said he was staying with her. After that, Steve called me into the house and told me not to touch anything. What a nasty guy. As I stepped through the door, I was stunned. It was a real Millionaire's mansion, with Italian furniture and expensive vases everywhere. What a luxury! The perfect mansion for TikToks! Steve had told me right away that Miss Matson was a millionaire and that I needed to keep an orderly house and keep an eye on her so she didn't get hurt. In return, I would get a big salary and a room in the mansion. Awesome! In just a month, I would be able to afford a rented apartment in the downtown and branded clothes. I quickly agreed and signed the contract. Steve went out on business and finally told me to introduce myself to the hostess, Miss Matson. Well, I went into the living room and suddenly there was a shot. Paint shot through my shoulder, and in a panic, I threw myself behind the sofa, knocking over a statue. What the hell? Then I noticed the paint on my shoulder. It was a paintball. Come out, little thief, I heard. Peeking out cautiously, I saw an old woman with a paintball gun. And then she shot me again. Was she crazy? I shouted that I was actually her new housekeeper. But the old woman grinned strangely and pressed a button on the wall. What's that for? At the same moment, the security guards broke into the house. They instantly pinned me down. Wait, you got it all wrong. It was this old lady who was shooting. But the big guys dragged me to the police station. I had to sit in a dirty cell for 2 hours until Steve came for me. He said something to the cops, and they let me go. I thanked Steve, but said I wouldn't work for this crazy old woman. Then Steve gripped my arm tightly. He hissed that I had smashed an expensive statue and owed Miss Matson a lot of money. So either I would pay now or I would work it off. Why was I so unlucky? I was beginning to hate that old woman. Steve gave me a ride back and told me to clean the mansion floors. But I quickly gave up on cleaning. I turned on the live in TikTok and began to show the rich mansion to my followers. Look how cool I live. But then the Millionairess came into the living room. And the live ended. Damn it. She said that the servant should fulfill all her whims. Today, she wanted to have exotic animals in her house. For example, snakes. What? There was nothing to do. I found animators with snakes on the web. And they were at the mansion for dinner. The sight of the snakes made me sick. But for Miss Matson, the snake was a delight. While the animators ate snacks in the kitchen, Miss Matson examined the creeping reptiles. What a pity that they are a captive, she wailed. And suddenly the Millionairess opened the lid of the terrarium. What was she doing? The snakes instantly spread all over the house. Miss Matson ran after them with a squeal of joy, leaving me alone. And then Steve came home. When he saw the snakes on the floor and me at the empty terrarium, he started shouting at me and told me to catch them all quickly. I shuddered at the thought of the slimy reptiles, but there was no way out. I took a couple of mops from the back room and went to look for these creatures, but they were everywhere, under curtains, under the sofa, in vases. Suddenly, one of them fell from the chandelier right on my face. I almost died of fright, but I quickly threw it into the terrarium. As a result, all the cattle were locked up again. But Steve was still furious. He threatened me with the police if something like this happened again. Then I would not only have to pay the debt, but also go to prison. Please, no, I begged. If anything happens to Miss Matson, you're screwed. Steve threatened and went back to his room. Evening came and I went to my room, hoping to shoot at least one normal video for TikTok at night. But it was not to be. The old woman called me and ordered me to sing her a lullaby. Seriously? This is madness. After my terrible lullaby, she demanded to close the window. You see, she was cold, but the damn hinges were jammed. The old woman did not let up, and I went outside to try to close the window from the outside, but the drought made the door to the house slam shut. In a panic, I ran to Miss Matson's window, but for some reason, it was closed. That old woman. I rang the doorbell, but of course, no one answered. So be it. In search of shelter, I went through the deserted alleys. But then I was accosted by homeless people. They started grabbing me and asking for money. I barely escaped from them and ran away. I returned to the Mad Millionairess' house in the early morning, and this time, the door was open. Weird. When I went upstairs, I looked into Miss Matson's room and was stunned. It was a mess, and the Millionairess herself was nowhere to be found. Oh no. Steve would kill me when he woke up and found out she was missing. My laptop was open on the table, and I ran to it. That's gross. Just recently, the old woman booked a plane ticket, but the flight was in an hour. I called a taxi and rushed to the airport, but the guards wouldn't let me in without a ticket. Heck! And then I noticed that Miss Matson was at the front desk. I lunged for the railing and slid over to her. I already reached the Millionairess when suddenly the guards caught me, and then Matson lied about me being her granddaughter, and they let me go. Wow, why would the Millionairess want to help me? I thanked her, but she said that I was going with her for that. What? Before I knew it, Miss Matson gave me a ticket and we were on the plane. The old woman immediately fell asleep, and I suddenly received an angry text from Steve. What have you done with Miss Matson? Where is she? This was the end. Now it was definitely the end. Upon arrival, I needed to immediately persuade the Millionairess to return. But as soon as the plane landed, the old woman abruptly ran away from me. I ran after her as fast as I could, pushing people aside. But I only caught up with her in the parking lot. She got into the last taxi and drove away. Confused, I looked around. Someone's bicycle was parked nearby, not believing I was doing it. I jumped on it and followed the taxi. The car soon stopped at the shore. I was sweating profusely, but I caught up with the Millionairess. I was about to yell at her when she took me by the shoulders and spun me around. Look, she said, and then I just forgot about everything. In front of me was the endless ocean at sunset. Is it really nice here? I heard the voice of Miss Matson. I nodded, unable to take my eyes off the ocean. But then I remembered about Steve and said that we should fly back. I still had a debt for the statue to work off, and I didn't want any trouble. The Millionairess replied that this was the first time she had heard of it, but she said she'd sort things out with her nephew if I stayed with her for another day. She always wanted to see the ocean. I thought about it. The offer was tempting, and I agreed. Near the ocean, I could shoot cool videos. But the old woman did not sit still for a minute. We spent the next day jet skiing, eating strange food, and collecting seashells on the beach. It wasn't at all like a rich people's vacation. But surprisingly, I liked it. I felt like I was really living for the first time in years. I was so engrossed that I didn't even shoot anything in TikTok. Miss Matson talked a lot about herself. She participated in dangerous expeditions and jumped with a parachute. Wow, her life was much richer than that of stars in TikTok. The day was over and it was time to go back, but Miss Matson brought a bunch of hipsters and a girl with a scar on her shoulder to me. The Millionaire said that she was going to a punk festival with them. What? But she promised we'd go home. I reminded her of our agreement, but suddenly Miss Matson stopped, fell silent, then swayed and fell to the ground. My God, she fainted! I quickly called an ambulance and we rushed to the hospital. I waited in the waiting room for a long time, all on edge. Finally, the doctor invited me to the room. Miss Matson lay pale on the bed. I was so glad she was alive. I sat down next to her, and Miss Matson sighed and admitted that she had terminal cancer. I started to cry, but why wasn't she treated in any way? The Millionairess replied that she was not going to spend her life on tubes and IVs. She wanted to live out the days she had left vividly. I spent the whole evening talking to Miss Manson until she fell asleep. She was so grateful to have me by her side, and I felt that during all the time we spent together, I became very attached to her. And then Steve burst into the room, furious. "Go home and pack your things. We're going to the police," he said to me and literally pushed me out of the room. I staggered towards the exit, completely defeated. What should I do next? I was just leaving the hospital when I stopped. I couldn't leave like this. I wanted to at least say goodbye to her before I left. When I got back to the hospital, I heard Steve's voice in the hallway, talking to someone on the phone. Steve said that the old woman was about to die, and he would become the owner of her fortune. When he finished, he went to the doctor and said that he agreed to euthanasia for Miss Matson so that she would not suffer. I was literally numb with horror. What a bastard Steve was! How could he dispose of someone else's life? And all this to get more money? I waited until neither Steve nor the doctors were around and made my way to Miss Matson. I explained that we had to run and literally dragged her out of the room in my arms. The paramedics noticed us in the corridor, but we managed to slip into the elevator and close the doors. We weren't caught. That evening, we sat by the ocean and chatted. Miss Matson promised to disinherit Steve and offered to let me live in her house without any obligations. I thanked her, but declined, saying that I would come to visit. I no longer wanted to be rich and famous in TikTok. I wanted to be like Miss Matson, to live every moment of my life vividly and truly.